Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about how to be a great journal member for the law review or a different journal. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We are here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about how to be a great journal member, whether you're on the law review or a different journal. And we would like to thank ProBoards for sponsoring this episode. They make some very cool keyboards and keypads for the legal profession, which have more than 35 function keys specific to legal practice for lawyers and law students, including that mysterious section key. We will talk about all of this later. If you want to find out more about their products, check out legalkeyboards.com or find them on social at Instagram at ProBoards LLC, Twitter at Legal Keyboard, or Facebook at LegalBoard. We are excited to share more later, so stay tuned. Well, Lee, let's start off by talking about why should you even try to be a great journal member? I mean, isn't this really just about what you can put on your resume?
Well, I think a lot of people join the journal because it looks good on your resume.
Let's be honest.
Let's be honest. But I do think you can learn a lot by really kind of leaning in and doing a good job. You might want to think about being on the board later. We actually have a quick tips episode on this, but a lot of kind of prestige and experience comes from serving on the law review board. And so that's something that you may want to learn more about. And you need to, make sure that you're a great staff member if you want to consider being a board member. I think that it really is a good learning experience. I know that my legal writing and editing and Bluebooking really got better and better the longer I was on that law review. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. I didn't love law review, but I will say that is the only reason that I learned how to actually cite check and to do that competently and to do it with confidence and to know that when I was in an actual legal job, if someone handed me a document and said, we need you to cite check this, I was able to do that.
Yeah. And I actually remember getting feedback from my supervising attorneys when I was a new associate and a summer associate that they didn't find errors in my work,
right?
Which is one of the best compliments you can get, I think, as a young lawyer, is that they don't have to redo your work, because that makes your supervising attorneys super happy if they don't have to redo your work. And I do attribute that to the practice and diligence of my law review work.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think unless you are going to be competent at site checking, you're going to have to do that a lot. And like it or not, that is basically the bulk of what you're doing when you are a journal member that first year. Usually your second year, occasionally they'll let 1Ls come on. But I mean, it can be tedious, let's be honest, but it's also something that you will do in your day job as a lawyer. And if you are good at it and people can trust you, that goes a long way as a young associate or any type of young lawyer, that somebody knows they can hand this document to you and it will come back basically perfect.
The other thing that I think is a skill that I didn't fully appreciate that I was working on so much on the law review is really understanding how to check your sources and make sure your citations are correct. So really digging in and saying, does this source really support what's in this paper? Does this source have a quote that is exact? I think that is something that I didn't always, double, triple check when I would write my own papers. And I think that you really start to see why that becomes so important, especially because law review articles that are published are often used as citations in future things, right? And so you want those to be as perfect as possible. And I don't think I really had asked those very thoughtful questions about, in-depth source checking, maybe since I was doing my thesis in undergrad, but I don't even think I was doing it at the careful level that you're really required to do on the law review.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You really, I remember they made us go to the physical book. I don't know if people still do this or decided that online sources might be good enough these days. But, we literally had to go dig out that like piece of the magazine or the journal or the book or whatever it was. Like I had to hold that book in my hands and read it. And I think your point is absolutely accurate that, that gives you a different appreciation really for just what a source is and what we're using it for.
And what those signals mean. I think
gosh,
that's,
yes.
Like if something is saying, see also versus, and a direct citation, those really have meaning. And I think that after you're on the law review or serving on any journal and you spend time with sources, I think you get a lot of exposure to why those signals are very important and they do have a lot of meaning. And it changed the way I read law review articles in the future. But I actually remember working on briefs as a new kind of associate lawyer and finding it kind of sickeningly fun to pick apart how incorrect the citations were in the briefs I was responding to. And so it would be like, that's not what the case said. They screwed up the quote. Like, that's not, if you continue reading, that's not what it says. And you start to see that if you have a high attention to detail and if you're able to comb through materials fairly quickly, it is a great tool to have as a litigator because you get to really outshine the other side for being much more competent.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I was clerking and we got a brief. And of course, like I looked up all their citations. I looked at the cases they were citing. And in one case, they had literally edited out a not.
Yeah. I found similar things. Yeah.
They totally, I went to the judge. I'm like, you're not going to believe this one. Like, you see this ellipse here? Like, they took out the not. The case says the opposite of what they're trying to claim it says. Suffice it to say that didn't go over so well.
Yeah. And I think that's not as shocking as we would like to believe.
Right. Like they were just totally thought nobody was actually going to look at it. But like I looked at it because I looked at everything.
Right. And often in large trials, one side is just trying to drown the other in paperwork.
Right.
And so they're just churning out briefs, things to file. And so they may not be as careful as they maybe should because their job is to just bury the other side to cost a lot of money to respond to those things.
Yeah. So I think even though it can seem like this is sort of an artificial, annoying exercise, I think it does actually have a lot of applicability in the real world. And I do think taking it seriously, it's probably going to make you feel better. It doesn't usually feel great for people to kind of dial it in and make minimal effort. And also if you do that, these are your future professional connections. These may be some of the people you end up being closest to in your law school experience because they're the ones you're going to be spending a lot of time and energy around. So you probably want these people to think highly of you. So I do think it makes sense to, if you're going to bother like going through this experience, to actually try to do a good job, even if you don't love it, which I admit I didn't love it, but I still tried to do a good job.
Totally. Okay, so hopefully we've convinced you that you want to be a good, if not great, journal member. So you're going to do it anyway, so you might as well, show up with your best self. And so most people in this position are 2Ls. Sometimes you might be a second semester 1L. I did some journal work for a smaller journal as a second semester 1L, which was interesting because it was a bit of a window into what being on the law review would be like. But it was nice to get a taste of what it was like to be on a journal as a 1L before applying to the law review, because I also think I appreciated the type of skills they were looking for, which was great too.
Yeah, I remember my law school roommate did that her second semester. She joined like a smaller, I think might have even been like an online journal just to sort of get a taste of it. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is what you do. You do cite checks.
Right, exactly. But to be a great journal member, I think you want to go in and you want to try. You're not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of training. You have to, get better at the Blue Book. But it makes sense to come into it with a bit of a growth mindset. Pay attention to your training. Ask questions. Don't guess. Take it seriously. And you're going to find that you're going to get better and better at it and probably add some value.
Yeah, and I think the training piece is so key. Somebody spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how to train you.
Yeah.
And I know in any sort of situation, it's just really frustrating when somebody doesn't pay attention and like doesn't make their best effort to go through the training and like read the materials that you have provided them. And that can just be really frustrating. So you're not expected to know everything, but you are expected to make a good faith effort, sort of like reading your cases, as a 1L. Like you make a good faith effort. You look at the materials, you try to understand what they're saying. And then if you don't know something, you ask questions so that you're not guessing about how to do something, because that is just not really going to end up well. People would much rather have you say, hey, I don't really understand like what you're saying here. Is it this or is it that? And they'll be like, it's this. Great. Okay. You need to now remember that.
Right. And sometimes it's not cut and dry. Sometimes people are using sources that don't have an example in the Blue Book or are very tricky to figure out. And, part of being a good journal member is identifying when it is a tricky one and then going to the more senior members of the law review and saying, like, I'm hitting a wall on this, because sometimes it takes the technical editor or the EIC or whoever it might be to decide how to handle it. Because it may not be one that is easy, but you need to flag it for them. They're going to edit all of these journal pieces too, but the earlier stuff can get flagged, the more likelihood that it won't be an issue later in the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain stuff, some percentage, a pretty high percentage of the stuff is just like, all right, you got to go find the source, you got to check the page, you got to make sure that everything is abbreviated correctly. Like that stuff, you're going to pretty quickly get up to speed on and hopefully be able to do consistently, basically perfectly. And then there are these other things where it's like, I don't know how to cite that source. Like, what is this thing? This is weird. And so in that case, like you never want to guess. You just want to flag it for somebody who can then take a closer look at it.
Yeah. Especially on the internet.
Yeah.
Because
there's so much weird stuff.
There's so much weird stuff. And there are new formats of resources on the internet all the time.
There's stuff popping up. Like, how do you cite like a Discord channel or something? Like, is that in the Blue Book? I'm kind of guessing not.
The Blue Book's a little slow to remedy these things.
Right. When people don't know, like a certain subset of the law reviews actually edit the Blue Book every few years. I can't remember if it was every 5 years or every 10 years, but when I was on the Columbia Law Review, we were actually doing the Blue Book edit. So that gets crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we were minimum, 5 to 10 years kind of behind the sources that were coming out.
Which is why a lot of law reviews, I think probably all of them, have a style guide,
right?
Which is kind of an addendum to the Blue Book that may have kind of these newer sources or very specific preferences that the law review has that you need to follow that might be even in conflict with the Blue Book.
Right. And these are things like, when do we use a hyphen or not a hyphen, which you would be like amazed how much time and energy has been spent discussing that very question in various journals.
Can you short cite a statute? Do you need to always have the year at the end of a statute citation? Do you, and then I think a lot of these online resources, I think, vary by different law review, how they want to handle them, because it's not as cut and dry. Like, what if it's a PDF that's linked to, within a site? I mean, even our own site, right? We have blog posts that have links to PDFs. So it's like, how do you, cite the PDF within the blog post? And that's complicated stuff. So you've got to ask questions, and you have to be very detail oriented. If they give you all of these materials, you have to figure out how you're going to manage them and make sure that you understand the scope of the materials, because if you don't reference the style guide, that's going to be hugely problematic. So you want to make sure you understand what that is, how it intersects with the Blue Book, and what your job is. So this is a lot of being detail oriented and paying attention.
Right. Like, you need to bring your A game here and actually like think about what you're being asked to do. I think sometimes it can be like, oh, I'm just going through the motions of like, whatever, it's on page 10 of like this journal. Okay, great, done. But like, there's more to it than this, and there's a process, but you can even make suggestions, to improve that process once you actually understand it. Like, people are generally receptive to like, hey, wouldn't it be easier if we did it this way, or like whatever. So you can bring like a positive, enthusiastic attitude, even if the work itself can frankly be like kind of boring or tedious. And I think the more that you can bring an attitude of like, oh, maybe there's something like interesting I can uncover, or maybe I'm going to find something that like we don't know how to do. I think it just, it improves your experience as well.
I think that's true. And I think there is a collaboration element on some of this work, especially as you've done it longer. That can also be kind of fun. I personally like problem solving as a group. I don't always love a group project, but I do love problem solving as a group. So that's another thing. If you enjoy that the law review can give you the opportunity to do that. The one thing you also need to keep in mind is that these articles go through like layers and layers of edits. And that means that your work is a small piece of a much larger timeline, and you need to do your piece on time.
Oh, which, for sure.
Let's be honest.
Basically number one.
I know, which is a great skill to have as a lawyer because, courts also don't let you be late. So you've just got to practice, especially if you're a procrastinator, getting your stuff done on time. But you really do have to understand that, and I didn't fully understand this until I was on the board, like how many times each article goes through rounds and rounds and rounds of edits. And you don't want anyone being the thing that stops the machine, that slows down the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it may seem like it doesn't really matter if you're like, oh, I'm not feeling well today, I'll just like turn this in tomorrow. But that might set everyone else back by like a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So much better that you go to whoever is assigning you work and be like, I just tested positive for COVID. I can't go to the library. Like, I need somebody else to take this on. And they would much rather take that away from you and give you something else later than have you sit on it.
Yeah. And if that's hard for you to do because you're a people pleaser or a perfectionist, we hear you, but this is a great life skill. You have to be, I mean, I'm serious, but it's true though, right? I mean, you have to be able to go to your boss, to go to your team member, to go to your supervisor, whoever it might be, and be honest about the situation so you don't flake at the end. Like there's nothing that drives me crazier than being put in a crummy position because I didn't have information about something that was happening with someone else that I could have fixed. Like, I'd much rather have like notice and be able to like take the work on myself rather than just at the end be like, oh, well, I've been sick. Well, I'm sorry you've been sick, but you could have told me that.
Yeah, and things happen, like I just got COVID and was like, oh, great. I guess I'm like not going to do this thing I was supposed to do for the next 10 days, because like I need to stay home and not get other people sick. And like, was that inconvenient for the people who were scheduled me to do stuff? Probably, but like they dealt with it. It was fine. Nobody like made me feel bad. It wasn't my fault.
Right. It's just part of life. And I think that, maybe one of the things that has come out of the pandemic is I think we're all a lot more open to talking about things like illnesses when they come up because people don't want you to come to work when you're sick as much anymore.
Right.
And hopefully. But I do think that it is something one has to practice of saying, like, this is what's happening with me. And then either this is how I'm going to remedy it or this is what's happening to me. And I think it's going to kind of like be a bummer, but there's nothing I can do about it. So, it's a good skill to have because this is life, because life always has bumps in the roads and you're going to have to learn how to communicate them to the people who are relying on you in whatever job or profession that you have.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a journal is a great practice for actually being a lawyer. So let's dive into a few sort of specific tips around, okay, great. I want to do a good job, but how can I do that? Well, one of the things we just talked about is the timing aspect. So like, of course, things come up and they're emergency situations and you need to deal with that. But generally speaking, people need to carve out enough time for the assignments they've been given and really try not to procrastinate on this because that is just where things go badly wrong.
Yeah. And if you're looking at your calendar and you can't find the time, then you really need to sit with your calendar and figure out how you're going to find the time, like blocking it off. Really saying like, I'm going to need 4 hours over 2 days to do this assignment. And here are my 4 hours. Saying like, I'll do it on Friday is one thing, but I think you really want to carve it out into your schedule like any other important assignment.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I found that actually was like, I didn't mind about the law review stuff was I could often fit it in like when I had smaller periods of time, maybe like, 45 minutes between two classes or something. That I'm not going to realistically sit down and like study in that time frame. That just wasn't how I operated. But I might be like, oh, you know what? I have this assignment. I know it's going to take about 2 to 3 hours. I can get half of it done probably if I really focus in that 45-minute period. I'm already going to be at school. I'm going to be by the library. Like I can knock this out. And I think it can be useful to fill those little gaps in your day by doing something that's actually, not that taxing.
Yeah, that's true. It's also important to ask a lot of questions, as we said, but pay attention to the answers. So perhaps you're taking note on the answers. You are, hopefully you've got your blue book. I think you should have a physical one and an online version. And then I would probably have a printed out version of any style guide documents that your law review has as well. And then I would just take notes on those docs. Like I actually have a blue book that has comments and notes on it, or notes when the style guide applies. Like these are living and breathing things that you're working on. And so taking notes so you don't have to ask the same question over and over again, or you don't make the same mistake over and over again is also really critical.
Yeah, I think you could also, I use my phone notes a lot for stuff like this, where it's like, oh, okay, this is something I need to probably reference later. I'm just going to go ahead and make a note. I have a running list of all this stuff. And before I ask the question again, I usually try to look at that list and be like, did I already ask somebody this? Oh, you know what? I did. And there's the answer. Because that is going to save everyone in your life, including you, a lot of frustration and time and energy.
Yeah. So we mentioned that you're going to get a lot of materials from your law review. So you need to read them all and make sure you have copies of them, and you should reference them. And again, if you have questions, you should try and answer them yourself first before going to the more senior law review members, because they're also super busy and they don't want to answer questions that are easy to find in the materials they've created.
Right, because people, like we said, have spent a lot of time and energy creating, maintaining, editing these materials to try to make your life easier and their life easier. And when it's clear you haven't looked at them, that does not end up looking good for you.
Yep. So there are a lot of things you can do to make things easier for yourself. So I mentioned that you can have a physical version of the Blue Book and the online version of the Blue Book. If you have a physical version, we recommend that you tab it. So you can buy the little plastic tabs, and that way you can flip through the Blue Book quickly to find common tables. You're going to go to this one table that has all the abbreviations.
Oh my gosh, that one's
like
80% of what you use
I know,
your Blue Book for.
I know. So you just want to boom, and there's that tab. It makes it so much easier. You also may want to keep a running list of common types of citations that you may need and where to find them. So almost like a cheat sheet, like you would make for an exam. That may be very helpful. And the last thing I think that can help, since you're doing probably a lot of this editing on your computer, is you want to set up the symbols that you use a lot so you're not trying to find them all of the time. And I think this is, I know, because let's just talk about the symbol key. Let's just talk about it. It's so annoying.
No, I felt like I'm just not a person who uses keyboard shortcuts. So for me, I'm always like, oh my God, how do I get to that stupid symbol? And I'm trying to cut and paste it, and it's not doing it. It's just this is such a nightmare.
I know. This is how terrible. So I'm working on studying French, and I have not fully learned how to add accents and everything on my computer. So even things I know how to say, I will translate them just so I can copy and paste it with the correct accents into an email.
Oh yeah, no, I did that in Spanish. I still don't know how to do some of the accents. I admit it.
No,
so you can solve this problem.
Yes, maybe not our accent problem, but you can definitely solve your legal problems by using ProBoards.
Yeah, so you can set these up one by one, but you can also check out the ProBoard's LegalPad, which is their type keypad, or the board, which is a full keyboard, so that you will never have to look for these or screw them up again. Sounds absolutely life-changing. Even the things like the spacing on F sup and F second and F third, stuff like that, you will have to do all the time.
All the time.
And I still don't think I've entirely memorized which has a space and which has a period and which doesn't.
I used to, but it's been
I used to know,
time.
But now I'm I typed it for the script and I was like, I don't think that's right. I would have to look that up in the Blue Book.
But I can guarantee that you did not go look it up in the Blue Book.
No, because I don't care at this point. I hope whoever edits the transcript looks it up, but I can't guarantee that.
All right. Well, the Blue Book is sitting on my desk. Maybe I can look it up after.
Yeah, maybe tell Nicole to edit the transcript properly so We're not telling people. Anyway, if we had the LegalPad, we would just push the button.
Yes, exactly. So this is all part of working on your process so you don't waste time.
So wasting time is so critical. Not wasting time is
is so critical. So if you have to go to the library to site check, make sure you look at where everything is and plan a route that makes sense, either within one library or across multiple ones. You don't want to have to double back because you didn't look at the whole list before you started. We're not into wasting time. So just a little planning can help you be more efficient. And so, 5-10 minutes of planning is going to make this so much better.
I remember like days where I wouldn't look at the full list of things that they'd given me to site check. And I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to do them in order because why not? I only did that once or twice because I'd realized like I just walked all the way across campus to look at that library. And now I have to walk all the way back to the one that's right beside of it because I didn't bother looking to see what I need to find.
Yeah, exactly.
So frustrating.
And then you also want to have a process for how you're going to do site checks and make sure everything is correct. So this involves above the line edits, which is means the stuff that's above the footnotes and below the line. So you're going to be required to look at it all, but you want to think about how you want to attack it. So do you read the text first and then try and edit the textual issues? And then do you go footnote by footnote, checking both the source and the citation? And then do you have a round where you go back and make sure that the short cites are correct? Because that's its own thing, because you have to count the number of them. And
you
so
have a certain number in a row, and if you move something, it can screw everything up. So these are like your ids and your like C whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Right. So this you want to have your own process, or you may ask more senior law review members if they have a process that they think is very efficient. You can definitely learn from others, but you don't just want to stare at the page and say, where should I start? That's not a great thing. So I would always start at the top. I think starting with above the line is great, but you also just have to be very conscious of what your role is. And if you're looking for typos and misspellings and abbreviations in the above the line text, you want to make sure that you know what you're looking for. So those edits are very meaningful, and then go below the line and see what you're responsible for there as well. So that's why you have to ask a lot of questions, because this is going to feel very new to you, and that's okay. Most everyone who's in leadership on the law review is going to be okay answering your question the first time you ask it. So you just want to make sure that you are writing down answers as you get them.
Right. And just making sure you really understand, like you were saying, the task that you have personally been assigned. Like, is your task to go find the book? Is your task to just check these citations? Like, what is it you're being asked to do? And really stay on task, because if you're doing stuff you don't need to be doing, it's really just a waste of everyone's time. You're not doing anyone any favors at that point. Yeah.
And so really, I think the idea here is that we know no one is perfect. We're not perfect. We made mistakes when we were new journal members, and you're not expected to be perfect, especially when you start. But you do need to try to get as close as possible to perfect as quickly as you can. Like most things, this is a learned skill, and you want to learn it. This is just not a role where you can skim over things and not pay attention. This is a time for focus, being very detail-oriented, removing distractions. There are plenty of tools that can help, and we've discussed many of them today, but you just want to show up and, give your best self to this project that is actually pretty important.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think anyone expects absolute perfection on day one, but we do, people expect you to have hopefully a pretty good attitude about a growth mindset. You're here to learn, you're trying to do your best, you're being conscientious. That goes a long way in life.
It does. And really, this is life. You're always going to be learning new skills. You're always going to be trying to show up as your best self and remove distractions and learn things as quickly as you can. So it's a good opportunity to practice that skill.
I think it is. And I say that as someone who did not particularly enjoy it. So I know, Lee, you were on the board. You went all in on this. I wasn't the social chair. I wanted to be the social chair my 3L year, but that was a really competitive position. So I ended up being, I think, the alumni liaison, which meant I got to do a few newsletters and plan a banquet. So that worked out okay.
Yeah. But I will say that some of the folks that I was on the board with, some of them I have remained friends with. Some of them, we have lost touch. But I think when you go through this experience together, you always have a bond. I mean,
right.
The EIC on my board, I ended up connecting you with him in Mexico because you all were living there together, near each other. And I hadn't talked to him in a long time, but it's like you've kind of gone through something together. Right. You've bonded.
You've been in the trenches.
You've been in the trenches. And I know that I could call him anytime about something and he would write me back. Like we had a shared experience. We have a mutual respect for each other. And I think there is something special about that.
I agree. I think you end up being closer to these people than like your average classmate. And yeah, I feel like, I ran into someone I knew from the law review when I was taking the California bar, and we were both just like, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. Like, how have you been? In a way that I'm not sure if I'd just seen some random classmate, it would have been more like, oh, hey, like, I hope you pass. Bye.
Yeah, exactly. One final thought. If you don't get onto the law review of your school, and that is a source of frustration for you, I would recommend, if you want to work on these skills, of joining another review journal in your school. Because I think that these are really important skills, and they can still look great on a resume if you're on another journal if the law review doesn't work out. So if you're listening to this and you're like, what if I didn't get on? Like, now I'm doomed because I'm not going to have these skills that would make me competitive in a job market. You can still get these skills other places. So that was probably one thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up.
I totally agree. And I think, there are a lot of people who don't even want to apply for the law review because they're more interested in a different journal. And that is 100% legit. Like, you should find something that's a good fit for you. And I think it's more the experience of having done a journal than any particular one. I mean, obviously some are more prestigious and might, open some doors. But the reality is, I think it's about the experience of having done this that actually situates you to be a better lawyer.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we're out of time. So we want to again thank ProBoards for sponsoring and remind you to check out their website at legalkeyboards.com or their social at Instagram at ProBoardsLLC, Twitter at LegalKeyboard, Facebook at LegalBoard, and we hope you check it out. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.